Okay, so in this problem, I'm going to talk a little bit about preparing a cost of production report. Cost of production report is necessary to allocate the cost for the month from a specific department to the different units that were produced for that month. There's three different classifications of the units. You're gonna have the units that were transferred in from the prior month, which had not been completed. So they were started in the prior month. They were not started in the current month, but they were worked on this current month, and we're going to assume that those are the first ones to be completed. So we're going to use the FIFO system. So the ones that were transferred in from the prior month are the first ones that will be completed this month. So we can say those are units that were not started but completed in the current month. Okay, they were started in the prior month. Then you're going to have units that were started and completed in the current month. And then you're going to have units that were started but not completed in the current month. Those stay in the department and they continue to be processed, right? So the department is going to have costs for that month. So how do we allocate that cost to those three different categories? One of the first things that we have to do is we have to take the whole units and convert them into equivalent units. Why is it that we have to do that? Well, we want to allocate our costs based on equivalent units. So, for example, if I had 200 units that were transferred in from the prior month that were 50% complete, what would that be in equivalent units as far as units that were started and completed in the current month? That would be 100 equivalent units, right? Because 50% was done in the prior month. So that's 100 equivalent units. And you're going to see how that works as I do this problem. This problem is not easy. That's why I'm recording it so that you can see it various times. We will do it in class as well. And hopefully you can, if you have any questions, just ask me. One of the things that you have to learn is the 4 different steps. That'll be a question in the exam, so learn the steps and learn the order of the steps, okay? So hopefully you'll get a better idea of what is a cost of production report. This is used for cost processing system. And then we're going to do an example that is more similar to what you will have on the test. And you'll have 2 questions very similar to this on the test. Okay, so let's start with problem 18-2A. Let's start by reading it. It says Fresh Mountain Coffee Company roasts and packs coffee beans. The process begins by placing coffee beans. So coffee beans is the materials, right? And it says the process begins by placing coffee beans into the roasting department. So we're working with the cost that the roasting department had for the month. And it's going to be the month of March, as you can see here. Okay, so it says from the roasting department, the coffee beans are then transferred to the packing department. Okay, so you start off with raw materials, which are the beans. You send them to the roasting department, and from the roasting department, you send it to the packing department, and that's the whole process. So we're going to focus on allocating the cost of the roasting department to the beans that were completed and the beans that stayed in the roasting department for further processing. Okay, it says the following is a partial work in process account of the roasting department for March 31, 2016. And we're going to use this to analyze the information and to try to understand how to complete this cost of production report. Okay, so it says prepare a cost of production report and identify the missing amounts of work in process. So we're going to identify these amounts. But for me, the most important thing is that you understand how this report is done and the logic behind it. Assuming that March 1 work in process inventory includes 5,700 of direct materials, determine the increase or decrease in the cost per equivalent unit for direct materials and conversion between February and March. I don't even know if we're going to do number 2. Again, my main concern is to teach you how to do the cost of production report. So let's start. Let's look at the cost of production report. Determine the units to assign cost. So, how many units that I need to assign cost? Let's take a look over here. It says the balance of March, 1,500 units, 30% complete. So I had 1,500 units that were transferred from the prior month, right? And in the prior month, the company incurred 6,150. They weren't transferred, I'm sorry. They stayed in the roasting department from the prior month. The roasting department had completed 30% of its work on it, so it needs to complete another 70% of its work on it, right? So the cost that these were allocated from prior month was 6,150, and now we have to give them the remaining costs from this current month, right? But as far as units goes, inventory and process March 1, 1,500 units, right? We need to account for those 1,500 units. Now, how many units did we start this month? And we get the clue from direct materials. Now, we're going to assume that direct materials goes immediately into, once you have a unit, that direct materials is immediately 100% in that inventory, right? So we don't add material afterwards. After material is the first step, and then you start processing it. So if we added 3,100 units in direct materials, that's the total amount of units we started for the period. Okay, so we have total units to account for of 23,800, right? And we're going to allocate costs to 23,800 units, but we don't want to allocate it based on whole units. We want to allocate it based on what is known as equivalent units. And hopefully my next step will give you an idea why. We have 1,500 starting units, right? So step 2 is to compute equivalent units. We have 1,500 units that we started, right? Of that 1,500 units, how much do we have to include in materials for this month? Nothing. 100% of the materials cost was incurred in the prior month, and it was allocated in the prior month. So as far as equivalent units for this month goes in materials, by the way, I didn't explain something. When we do a cost of production report, we divide it into materials and conversion costs. Conversion includes labor and overhead. And the reason it's divided that way is because they tend to go into the process at different stages. In this example, materials goes right at the beginning, whereas the remainder, the labor and the overhead, goes later on, right? So as I was saying, I have 1,500 units that were in the roasting department from prior month. They stayed there, right? This month, there's going to be zero material added to it because all of it was added in the prior month. So there's no need to add a cost related to materials. However, this problem says that this 1,500 units is 30% complete. So how much do I have to complete this month as far as equivalent units goes? If it's 30% complete from the prior month, I must complete another 70% of work. So I simply take 70% and multiply it by 1,500. I have 70% of conversion costs to add to these 1,500 units. In other words, that's the equivalent of preparing 1,050 units at 100%. So my 1,500 units, I'm not going to cost anything for materials for them because everything was added in the prior period, but I will cost the equivalent of 1,050 units as far as conversion cost goes. Inventory that was started and completed. So let's try to decipher that. Well, it says that I had direct material started of 22,300. Okay. Let's see if I have anything here. Okay, goods transferred. 21,700 was transferred out. That means that I must have completed 21,700. But I know that of that 21,700 that I transferred out, 1,500 were not started in the current period. So in order to find out how much I started and completed in the current period, I simply take 21,700 and subtract 1,500 from that. And I know that I started and completed 20,200. Of that 20,200, how much the equivalent units did I incur in materials? 100% of it, because it was started in this current period. So those are 100% of the 22,200 will be incurred in material. So the equivalent unit is going to be the same, 20,200. Of conversion costs, how much conversion cost did I incur? 100%, because I completed them, right? So it's going to be again 20,200. Okay. So far these are my equivalent units as far as what was transferred to the packing department. Okay. Now I have some ending inventory. So how do I calculate my ending inventory? Well, it says here that I started 22,300 units, right? So if I started 22,300 units and I started and completed 20,300, well, I must have left over 2,100. We know that from the example and from the question that 100% of the materials is added at the beginning. So I'm going to count for 100% of the materials as equivalent units. Now, how much work did I do on this 2,100 units in the month of March? It has to tell me over here somewhere, and it says it right here. The balance, X amount of units, we already know that the answer to that question is 2,100 units, 40% completed. 40% completed. So if it's 40% completed, I must have incurred 40% of my conversion costs. So what's the equivalent units for 2,100 40% completed? Just take 0.4 and multiply it times 2,100. That's 840. So my ending inventory, I have 2,100 units. These are the equivalent units that I'm going to allocate costs over here as far as materials and conversion costs. And of the ones transferred out, I have 21,700 units, which it says over here, that matches perfectly, of which 22,200 equivalent units in materials and 21,250 equivalent units in conversion costs. Okay. Don't worry if you're not getting this. I know it's a little complicated. You're going to have to do this various times before you start understanding it. Okay, so let's take a look. So now we have the equivalent units. Now we're going to apply our costs to these equivalent units. How much cost are we going to apply? Well, we're going to apply the cost that we incurred, right? How much cost did we incur? We incurred these costs here. It says it. Direct materials, 86,970. Direct labor, 11,900. And factory overhead, 5,772. Let's go ahead and put it in the proper cell. So for materials, I'm going to put the 86,970. 86,970. And for conversion costs, which is labor and overhead, I am going to put both of these, 11,900 plus, plus 5772. 5772. And that's what I am going to allocate to these units over here. So how do I determine the cost per equivalent units? Well, I simply take my total cost and I divide it by my total equivalent units. $3.90 in material is what I'm going to allocate to the three different categories. And as far as conversion costs, I'm going to allocate 80 cents per unit. And once I've done that, I would have allocated my total cost for the period, which is going to be these two together, right? Which is 104,642. I have that right there. So now we're going to start allocating it. Okay. So how much do I allocate to the different categories? Let's start allocating. That's step 4. Okay. Let's just put the 6,150 here, which we're not going to allocate, but that goes in the beginning. That's some of the cost that goes in the beginning inventory. Okay. And let's put it up here as well. This comes from over here, 6,150. That's the cost that was transferred over or stayed in the department. And this was the cost that was transferred over, as you can see, and this is the cost that we're going to allocate, the 104,642. Okay, so let's start allocating. We know that the 6,150 all goes to the beginning inventory. How much more cost are we going to add to that beginning inventory? The 1,500. Well, as far as materials goes, we're not going to add anything. All that was incurred in the prior period. But as far as conversion costs, sorry, here you can see better. As far as conversion costs, well, how much equivalent units did I have? I had 1,050 equivalent units, and I'm going to charge it 80 cents per unit. So if I multiply 1,050 equivalent units times 80 cents per unit, I will allocate $840 as far as conversion costs. So this inventory here, this 1,500 units, will have 6,150, which was carried over from the prior period, plus another 9,840 that we added from March to help us complete the 70% of conversion costs, right? Because we're charging 80 cents per equivalent units on conversion costs. How much are we going to charge for units that were started and completed? Same thing. What's the equivalent units started and completed? Well, we know that we started and completed equivalent units of 20,200, and we know that we're charging $3.90 as far as materials. So as far as materials goes, we're going to allocate a cost of 78,780. As far as conversion costs, again, 20,200 equivalent units, charging them 80 cents. We are going to allocate, we're going to charge them, allocate 6,160 of cost to of conversion costs to the units started and completed. So the units started and completed in the month of March have a total allocation of 94,940. Okay? And the units that weren't started but completed have a total allocation of the addition of these two, 6,990. Okay? But then there's inventory that's still in process. That's the inventory that stays in the roasting department. We still have to charge them. We still have to charge them a cost for the month, right? They're going to stay there, and they're going to roll over to the next month, but they're going to stay there. It's very similar to the 6,050. That was the cost that they allocated to inventory and process in February, and it carried over, right? So how much is going to carry over from the inventory in process? Well, we do the same thing. We have 2,100 equivalent units, 40% complete, right? So as far as materials, it's 100% complete. So we have 2,100 equivalent units charged at $390. We will allocate a total of 8,190 in materials cost. As far as conversion costs, we only worked on 40%. We're only 40% complete. So the 2,100 units becomes 840 equivalent units, which we will charge 80 cents per equivalent unit, which means we're going to charge them, as far as conversion costs, 672. So if you look at this here, all our costs to be charged, what was transferred plus what was added, 110, has been fully allocated between the three different categories. This is units started and completed. We charge those 94,940. Units transferred over will be charged a total of 6,990, and the units that stay in work in process will be charged, will have a cost of 8,862, right? So how much goods transferred? 21,700. What's the total credit here? Well, it's going to be 101,930, right? Because we transferred all this here. So the credit here is 101,930 because this is going to be transferred out and it's going to go to finished goods. How much is going to stay in the ending balance of work in process? 8,862. And that's going to be your balance down here. But the most important thing is to understand the cost of production report. It's a report that's used in the process costing system to allocate costs between the three different stages of inventory, the ones that stayed in the department and were completed, the ones that were started and completed, and the ones that were started but not completed. This is not an easy thing to learn at first glance. You're going to have to see it, this video maybe 2 or 3 times before you start understanding it. Ask me questions and pay attention in class, okay? Now, I had to explain that in order to be able to explain for you to understand this. And you'll probably be more interested in this because this looks a lot more like what will be on the test. So let's take a look at this example of a problem, and maybe what my prior explanation will help you understand this a little better. Okay? So let's take a look at this problem. The problem states, Department A had 5,000 units in work in process. That means that there were 5,000 units that stayed in that department because they weren't completed. So they were not transferred out to the other department, or they were not transferred out to finished goods. Okay? So immediately I'm going to create this category, starting inventory. And it says inventory, how much? 60% complete, right? 5,000 units were 60% complete. As to labor and overhead at the beginning of the period. Okay, 34,000 units of direct materials were added during the period. 31,000 units were completed during the period, and 8,000 units were 20% completed as to labor and overhead at the end of the period. It says that all materials are added at the beginning of the process, okay? That means that the 5,000 units is 100% complete as far as materials goes. And the first in, first out method is used to cost inventories, meaning that these would be the first ones to be completed, okay? So the question is, the number of equivalent units of production for conversion costs for the period was, so we need to calculate that, and the number of equivalent units of production for materials costs, okay? So let me do this. Let's do this just so that we could let's make sure. Okay. That way I could start from scratch and you can see how all this works out. Okay. So first thing we want to do is we want to calculate the total units that we need to account for. Okay. So starting inventory. What was our starting inventory? It says Department A had 5,000 units in work in process. So we started with 5,000 units. Okay. As far as materials go, how much are we going to work? How much cost are we going to add in this period to those 5,000 units? The answer is 0. Why? Because it says here all materials are added at the beginning of the process. So 100% of the materials was added is already included in this, and that was already costed in the prior month. How much equivalent units as far as these 5,000 units do we have to work on for as far as conversion costs? Well, we know that 60% were completed, so we must complete 40%. So we simply go multiply the 5,000 units times 4, and we must work times 2,000 equivalent units, right? So now let's look at the other line item, started and completed. it says that 34,000 units of direct materials were added. So we know we started 34,000. But how much did we complete of those 34,000? It says that 31,000 units were completed. Okay, so 31,000 units were completed. But we know that of the 31,000 that were completed, 5,000 were not started. So if I take 31,000 and I subtract 5,000, because those were not started, that's going to tell me the units that were started and completed. 26,000 were started and completed. Okay, how much of those equivalent units we use in material in this period? Everything, 100%, because these were started in this period. So 100% of that was needed for materials. And how much, what percentage of conversion cost? Well, it was completed, right? So you must have completed 100%. So the whole thing. That line item is pretty easy, right? So all you have to do is calculate the amount that you started and completed, and then you know that it's going to be 100% materials and 100% conversion cost. Now this one here isn't as easy. First, we have to calculate the whole units. It says started but not completed. Okay, so it says that 34,000 units of direct materials were added, meaning that 34,000 units were started, right? And of that, we completed 26,000. So we must have not completed 8,000. And it tells you that here. It gives you that information. You could calculate it, or in this case, it gives you the information. It says 8,000 units were only 20% complete. Okay. So as far as materials goes, how many equivalent units does that equal? Well, we put 100% of materials right at the beginning. So 100% of materials was consumed by this, 8,000 equivalent units. And how much work did we put in these 8,000 units? How much equivalent units did we work on this? It says 20% completed. So we multiply 0.2 times 8,000, and that gives me 1,600 equivalent units. So the question is, the number of equivalent units of production for conversion costs for the period was, well, we'll just add this up, 29,600. The second question, the number of equivalent units of production for materials costs for the period. We'll just add the materials column up. And the answer is going to be 34,000. Okay? Again, I understand this is not an easy topic. You're just going to have to do a lot of problems to understand this. See these videos various times, ask me questions, pay attention in class. You do have the solutions to the textbook on Web Campus under each folder for each chapter, so you can do as many problems as you like, and feel free to ask me as many questions as you like, okay? But this is going to be a very similar problem that's going to be on the test, so focus a lot on trying to understand how to do this, okay? This should be the last video, and you should have pretty much all the materials that you need for exam number 1. Thank you.